Alex is begging his girl to give him another chance. It was only a kiss, he cries. One kiss with one random girl. It doesn't mean anything. No, Alex, she replies. It's got nothing to do with that, and everything to do with the hours you spend locked in the toilet, looking at God knows what. You'll never hold down a real woman, not because you're a cheater, but because of your relationship with lust. No, I don't think watching adult material is necessarily cheating. Well, actually depends on what it is. I think there is a very compelling argument you could make that if you're maybe doing webcams and OnlyFans, I mean, you're kind of engaging in more than just the lust, which again, I believe is something that we're going to address shortly. But you're also looking at intimacy here, aren't you? If you're going through the aforementioned bits and pieces. And I think there's a compelling argument to be made that infidelity is predicated on whether or not there is a emotional relationship with the other individual, even if you haven't physically been in contact with that individual. So yes, I think so. And I think there is no better antidote to lust, in my personal opinion, than centralizing ourselves around a greater ideal. So I wanted to share Corinthians first and foremost. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so you can endure it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. There are many ways out of this. And I wanted to share with you 4 steps. The last one being, you can kind of see here, a violent, well, I'm not sure I would call it a violent option, but certainly an aggressive option that you can use in order to safeguard yourself against that kind of animalistic, carnal reflex. And I really like this Corinthians particular excerpt. It reminds me of another excerpt, because I've been reading the Quran at the moment, from the Surah Al-Baqarah. Hopefully my pronunciation is okay there. Allah does not burden any soul greater than it can bear. Allah does not burden any soul greater than it can bear. The trials and tribulations you're going right now are part and parcel of the journey of faith for you. And there is light at the end of the tunnel. You may feel that there is not at this time. That is similarly how I felt at the time when I was in the grips of lust. And I certainly identify, especially with Alex, towards the former part of this video. But this is a test, and your soul can endure it and move to the next level here. So we're going to start with the first point, which is understanding the citta. Now, the citta is a Vedic term. The way I personally interpret it is consciousness and perception. So we first have to address how a consciousness and perception is moving through, perceiving and absorbing information, data in this modern world. So let the mind not dwell on the sexual impressions. The impressions is the key point here, and voyeurism. So voyeurism is, I suppose, third-party pleasuring oneself to other people gratifying themselves. And I think you know where I'm alluding to there. Now, I wanted to introduce you to this word samskara, and why I mentioned that term, impressions. Samskara is another Vedic term, and it's predicated on this notion of influence of birth, death, and rebirth, fundamentally this karmic cycle. A lot of individuals, to put this more in layman's terms and an easier vernacular to understand it, might be that this idea of luck, good fortune for those individuals that are going on bouts of celibacy or SR, is typically predicated on this notion of reducing karmic debt. Karma is another word for action, and even a simpler term could be cause and effect. For every action, there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction. And lust carries a very, very heavy toll on the soul. And I don't just believe, I know for a fact, if you want to increase the likelihood in which you're perceiving luck and good fortune in your life, it would be to employ some of the things that I'm going to share with you and point to in just a second. But just so we understand it, this is the influences on birth, death, and rebirth beyond this particular incarnation. I know not everybody is privy to that idea, but I am. Preventing the cycle of karmic burden and increasingly modern principles of good luck and fortune are influenced by the knowledge of where your consciousness, where your perception is going. So, are we going to increase the rate in which our consciousness is ensconced in lust, or are we going to intentionally move it? So where attention goes, energy flows. You know this if you are contemporaries or have read anything by Joe Dispenza. I'm sure you're familiar with this. But the typical retort I get, or the rebuttal, is, but Joseph, this is incredibly challenging in the modern world, maybe even impossible. So what do I do? The first is you have to consciously remove sexual thought triggers, okay? So all of these, they're soft-core versions of lust. They're the precursors to lust. I have none of these on my phone, and I would probably extend the X platform to this as well, but because I'm very, very active on there, I've set up a list of words that I have removed from the possibility of scrolling onto. But even still, you have to be very, very careful about what your mind... Look, this device here is something that you're interfacing with. There's a psychic connection. There is something much more deeper and sinister than you can perceive physically here. It's a psychic interface. It's almost like a palantir. It's like a crystal ball. And you know, when you're interfacing with some of these apps, you are downloading, you are diluting your consciousness with soft-core lust, or the precursors to lust, or entertaining the idea of temptation into your life. And that is a real thing when you change the verbiage and the terminology that you're using. Psychic interfacing with this palantir, this crystal ball. And this crystal ball is projecting lust, the feeling, the energy. And the energy of lust is so low, it's below... I think it might be one of the lowest ones opposed to apathy and shame, but it's really, really down there. It's like an emotional hell, these kind of emotions. And it is all a ploy, it is all a trick to keep you in your lower selves, keep you trapped, keep you bound, keep you a slave. And if you want to get really conspiratorial, to start to harvest loose energy off you, spiritual energy off you. And if you want to get even more conspiratorial, you know, there can be discussions about reptilians, prison planet, things like that. But look, it is, I know this isn't particularly unique, this idea, but I don't want you to think of this as, you know, apps that are potentially dangerous. I want you to think about this as psychic palantirs that can influence your consciousness so you're dragged down into emotional hell. Really meditate on that idea because it's serious. The second one requires some conscious effort. This is more about environmental tailoring and conditioning, perhaps. Practice thought redirection. This is a muscle that you have to develop. So the first one is consider the context in which one of these previous impressions from watching illicit material arises. The second step would be to redirect it to a predetermined thought. So actually before this, you should already have a predetermined, I call it a memory anchor, or a consciousness anchor is another way to describe it. And basically it's where you've previously sat down and if you've established to yourself, okay, when my consciousness starts to get weak and drift into these areas where it's tempted, I bring it back to like an emergency plan in which I've established a consciousness which is associated with higher positive emotions. So it might be Christ. It might be this vision of Christ. And I believe, irrespective of the religion that you have, the deity in that religion, Jesus Christ for Christians, Allah for Muslim brothers, could be Krishna for my Hindu brothers. That is your anchor into the gathering of consciousness. It's a very, very powerful anchor. And it doesn't matter which one of those you choose, whichever one has the most emotional relevance to you, it can be extremely potent. Or positive memories. It might be that you have several memories that you're particularly fond of that have an association with a higher emotion. An emotion of love is a really, really powerful one to orientate yourself around. If it's love by your family, if it's love by a lover, perhaps. Anchoring yourself around that memory, rehearsing the memory, is a very, very powerful way to move you up out of lust. Or it could be a vision of the future. This is your why. And it's really compelling. I find people can give up poor habits if they have a strong enough why. That's Nietzsche, isn't it? He who has a why can withstand any how. So if your why is strong enough, if your vision is strong enough, and I don't just mean a materialistic vision around a fast car and digits in your bank account, but I mean a vision that has an emotional reaction to you. And that's typically one of love or higher. Community would come into that very, very big. So establish this prior to, and then you want to practice strengthening your prefrontal cortex with mindfulness practices, meditative practices throughout the day. And that increases the neural connections in your gray matter to allow you to better get into these strong memory consciousnesses and mitigate the feelings of lust in your psyche. So that is the sitter, your consciousness. Next one is dopamine remapping. So the first point in this is when we're no longer getting this influx of dopamine through sexual stimulation, where is a man to source it? A lot of people call this the flat line and the stage where it's very, very dangerous to relapse because there is a diminishment in the pleasure that you're experiencing in life. And typically, if you don't have a reference point for where to go, the body will revert to old patterns. If it's smoking, if it's going back on those websites, you need to retrain your body to find dopamine in past times that are of intrinsic value to you, pardon me. Now, the pivotal point in this is that you have to understand how dopamine works. It's an anticipatory chemical. And it secretes in that way, in that manner, meaning if you have not planned to experience pleasure throughout your day, throughout your week, that's when you start to get reactive and you start getting the itch to go on these websites, to go for a cigarette, whatever the case may be. So you need to schedule in. I mean, for me, I love five-a-side football. I love watching football. I love going to the pub with my friends. I love swimming in the sea. I've got a cold water group that I go with every Sunday, and we go and jump in the sea. And by the way, cold water exposure, dopamine goes up 200%. So that's another bit of game that you can start to integrate into your dopamine remapping, brain rewiring program. And meeting with friends always builds not just dopamine, but oxytocin, pair bonding, and allowing you to kind of boost your serotonin, getting that feel-good chemical, which is going to allow you less to revert back to old patterns. So the point here is plan for pleasure. You have to have a plan. Otherwise, you're going to revert to the old patterns, which are going to be reactive. 21 days. The 21 days is the time it takes for your chemistry, your neurology to heal and rewire and re-establish itself to a new dopamine system and fundamentally a new lifestyle. If you're not consciously planning out your day, so we talked about this before, relapsing into old habits, when you haven't preoccupied the mind, it will revert back to mindless way of finding dopamine, for sure. And don't be surprised to find yourself being drawn to smoking, drinking excessively, and other drugs to source pleasure. Some of the ones that I personally use, I didn't put deep breathing in here because people are probably sick and tired of me talking about deep breathing, but it's such a valuable one. One of the things I do is, because I used to smoke a lot, one of the things I do is I don't take smoke breaks anymore. I take breathing breaks. So I just go outside. I've got a little patio out here, and I just take 2 minutes and I do deep, deep breathing, and I get high from it. If you do deep diaphragmatic breathing, flood your system, your body, your blood with oxygen. And also if you do breath retention holds, you'll get high. You'll get that feeling, and it's amazing. Obviously you're not doing it for the high, but it's a great way to start to reintegrate and rewire yourself to dopamine. So take a breathing break, get outside, change the environment, and do deep, heavy breathing. I mean, it's almost like hyperventilating, I guess you could say. But it's all natural. It's prana you're taking in. It's very, very healthy for you as opposed to smoking, and certainly going onto those websites where those poisonous pixels are so temptuous. So when you're doing these things, only do these things. They take 20 minutes or less. Everybody has the time. If you're honest with yourself, you'd realize you waste more time than you use. I think for me, it's about reducing the barrier to entry to integrate some of these habits. So the best way to do this is to stack the habits, meaning I don't even think about meditating. I brush my teeth, I sit down to meditate. I always brush my teeth before I go to bed. And because I always brush my teeth, I pair that with meditating. If there's something that you do every morning or every evening, might be brushing the teeth, hopefully it is brushing the teeth, pair that with one of these activities. And you'll be amazed at how quickly you can start to map that new habit and stack it on top of one that's already been established. And that's something that's something that I do with my clients quite a lot. Just a quick one on the clients, guys. We are booked up for January, but I'm opening some new spots if you want to work with me personally for February, and the link is in the description below. But here we are coming to the violent option as I have categorized it here. Violent might be not the correct verbiage to use, maybe aggressive might be. I want to mention a caveat before I share this one. It's particularly sensitive to libido, but I do not do this one because it doesn't pair with my personal fitness goals. For some of you, this won't be, you won't be able to do this because it might not be congruent with your lifestyle. It is known that a vegetarian diet helps attenuate the sexual reflex because it is alkaline. It's an alkali diet. Animal products are typically higher in fat, which upregulates the endocrine system and increases libido. One could say that they have aphrodisiacal, good try, Joseph, properties, okay? So there's a particular gentleman here who has described himself as the radical, preachy vegan, who has noticed a decrease in their libido since making the switch from a vegetarian diet to even a vegan diet. So a vegan diet might, again, be even more effective. Maybe I haven't explained myself the best in terms of why you would do this. If you're really struggling with lust, having your hormonal profile and your libido under control through an alkali-based diet may be an option for you to gain the confidence and start to mitigate, strong urges in that respect. Low levels of zinc in vegetarian and vegan diets, which means there could be a correlation with low testosterone there. So maybe it is a violent option because not a lot of people will do that. However, if you find yourself out of control in respects to lust and damaging your life in a sense where it's even worse than this particular individual here, this might be an option for you to consider. But remember what I said at the start. Allah does not burden the soul more than it can tolerate. And if you subscribe to that, you can subscribe to me. These are not theories, these are facts. Speak soon.